Spoilers for Konosuba.
The anime protagonist. He inhabits a weird position in fiction. More than in any other genre, the MCs of an anime are more often than not the faces and souls of the story they are positioned in. So, naturally, inquiries about the nature and writing behind that concept can give ample insight into the workings of the medium. So, for example, we ask, is a protagonist in anime always a good person? A simple question at first, with a simple answer. No, of course not. Being good is not a prerequisite. The protagonist is often just the lens through which we experience a story. And in the past, there have been examples of very popular protagonists in anime landing at the dark end of the moral spectrum, like Lelouch and Light Yagami. But looking at it this way reveals something interesting about anime protagonists. There are really only two types, two boxes in which we can put the vast majority of these MCs, with very little variation or overlap. On one side, we have the too good to be true, pure of heart good boys, who strive for justice and freedom and are mostly either self-inserts or overpowered role models, such as Kirito from SAO or Goku from the English version of DBZ respectively. And on the other side, we have the bad guys, the edgelords, the maniacs. Here we find characters that are meant to instill a certain catharsis and a power fantasy, by not being constrained by morality and emotion. The aforementioned Light and Alucard from Hellsing come to mind. Now, both of these sides can be executed extremely well, with characters like Deku from My Hero Academia or Lelouch. But when described as dichotomous as this, it makes the anime landscape of protagonists seem kinda barren and empty, with only really two types to choose from with small variations. Perhaps this is why one of the most enjoyable protagonists from the last few years was, for me at least, a certain dickhead from Konosuba. Now, if you haven't watched Konosuba, the basic premise is similar to most other isekai trash shows. Modern guy gets transported to an alternate world that is part middle-age, part RPG video game, and is tasked with saving/changing it while collecting thirsty waifus like Pokemon cards. So far, so SAO. Beyond this, however, the show starts to deviate quite a bit from the standard formula of the genre. And one huge aspect that causes this is the protagonist. You see, the dude getting sucked into the fantasy world this time isn't your average hero-kun. Instead, it's a young man named Satou Kazuma. In order to fully grasp what kind of character Kazuma is, I think it's valuable to quickly summarize his presence within the first episode of the show. Within seconds, we are introduced to an absolute loser. I'm not even memeing here. His life seems miserable, alone, vapid. But it seems like it is of his own choosing. He wastes all his time playing video games and avoiding social contact, stating that he hasn't seen the sun in quite some time. But because of how he delivers this opening introduction with a dry, unfazed tone, we don't feel pity for him, we feel mostly amused and somewhat encouraged to laugh at him. But soon after, we get the first break of this established personality. The shut-in gamer, who allegedly hates people, jumps in front of what he believes is a truck to save a young woman and dies in the process. Within 6 minutes, the loser has become a tragic hero. So after his death, he is confronted with a goddess in the afterlife, offering him the chance to continue his life in a fantasy world if he promises to strive to save that world from an evil king. Of course, he accepts and is then told that he can choose one thing to take with him: an unbeatable weapon, an incredible superpower, anything. Only problem is, said goddess had earlier made fun of him for how he died, since the girl he saved was never in danger and his death was in vain. So, out of spite, he decides to take her with him and effectively lock her into that world alongside him until they defeat the king. And so, as she sobs and he laughs maniacally, they are sent into this alternate, game-like world and the adventure begins. If there is one thing this first episode establishes thoroughly about Satou Kazuma, then it's that he does not fit into any of the aforementioned categories of typical shonen MCs. He's neither an evil, cunning, maniacal edgelord, nor is he a power fantasy or an ideal hero. He is, simply put, an asshole. And that is genius. Let me explain. As stated earlier, this quest quickly turns into a harem for young Kazuma, amassing a group of mildly attractive anime stereotypes. So, what is the core defining feature of other ecchi harem comedies like this? Their protagonist is usually, well, pretty lame. They usually fall into the righteous hero category, but not in the way someone like Deku does. They are usually nice and friendly, but absolutely vapid and devoid of any actual personality. And this is by design. These MCs are usually meant to be stand-ins, self-inserts for the viewer. It's how Bella from Twilight was created without a personality because the author wanted to ensure any readers could identify and insert themselves in her. And this is the first reason Kazuma stands out. He is absolutely not meant to be a self-insert. He has defined likes and dislikes and a very clear personality. And while that may diminish his relatability, it makes him a fuckload more memorable. And the personality he does display is pretty entertaining, to say the least. He teases, he bullies, and he mocks, but he does all that with such snark that it's just endearing. Additionally, it makes his character a lot more believable. Of course, the shut-in gamer teen whose only real interactions were probably online arguments would be a complete troll. Think about how real teenagers act, and you will find that Kazuma is pretty close. But just like most teenagers, there is one aspect that, despite all the dickish behavior, still makes us like him. He may be a bit of an ass, but he isn't a bad person. He simply doesn't take shit. His constant snark and sarcasm, paid with moments of friendliness during all that, really sell him as just a teenager who, while being a bit difficult sometimes, ultimately wants to do good. True, at times the good he tries to do is connected to the prospect of rewards, but him trying to save people and sacrificing himself twice within 2 seasons definitely doesn't paint the picture of a bad or evil person. It makes him realistic. Most people that age, no matter how insufferably smug and cynical they can be, are not inherently bad kids. He does things he wants to do and enjoys doing, and likewise avoids things he dislikes, which not only lends to the realism, but also reinforces him as an actual character. And he would be a great character on his own, but once he assembles his party of the dumb bitch Aqua, the explosive lolly Megumin, and the masochistic Oppai warrior Darkness, that's when he and they really shine. Now, in a lesser show, the protagonist would call these people friends all the time while being too shy to ever really interact with them, since he'd be too busy bleeding out of their noses whenever their cleavage was visible. Any notion of friendship would only be present by the characters constantly going, "I have to protect my friends." Similarly, romance and sexuality would only be present in the form of boob gags. And of course the protagonist would never actually follow up on any romantic sexual feelings, because that would make him less relatable for the usually young and romantically inexperienced target audience. Luckily, Konosuba is an absolute banger of a show and knows how to handle this. The dynamic that is established between these 4 friends is based around one simple yet effective concept. They are all difficult, annoying assholes in their own way, but they complete each other in their dysfunctions. So their interactions are constantly framed around them just being mean to each other, insulting and mocking. But here's the deal. This is so much more convincing as far as friendships go. Think about your own best friends. Which phrase is more common between you two? "I love you so much, you are my friend," or "Ay lamau, fuck off you big gay." Once people have a certain cadence and trust with one another, they get comfortable, and the shallow, insecure compliments make way for confident, well-meaning teases and jokes. Between young best friends, appreciation and affection are very often expressed through disses, roasts, jokes, etc. Konosuba seems to be one of the few anime that seem to understand this basic concept of teenage human interaction, and it makes this group of lovable idiots so much more likable, since we don't just understand that they're friends, we believe that they are. They might be meaner and sometimes crueler to each other than real life friends, but the fact that it's anime and that what they do is usually still pretty tame makes them a believable and sincere group of friends. They might seem like assholes, but when push comes to shove, their actions and reactions show a clear care and appreciation towards each other. I mean, when he dies the second time, Kazuma starts crying over having lost the opportunity to hang out with his gang, and their reactions to him coming back show us a very distressed and worried side of them. These aspects make them very real and make us like them, even if their shenanigans might go too far one or two times. We like them because they like each other, and because we believe that they like each other. And Kazuma works perfectly as the core and the protagonist of this theme, being gloriously snarky and immensely entertaining, yet surprisingly down to earth and relatable. The last aspect of Kazuma's character I want to touch on is just how proactive he is. In most shows of this type, hell, in most anime, the protagonist often ends up being incredibly reactionary and passive, only really acting when some villain or some situation forces them to do so. By contrast, Kazuma constantly acts on what he wants and actively avoids what he doesn't like. He speaks his mind and stands by it, and therefore becomes a way more active character. This also ties into how the show handles sexuality. He actually acts on his sexual impulses, something that a typical anime protagonist would usually vehemently ignore or be ashamed of. Instead, Kazuma is pretty straightforward with his desires. Now, some of his advances could be seen as creepy, but we got to remember that this is an over-the-top comedy anime, so I think it's mostly fine. In fact, it's relieving to finally see an anime protagonist who actually acknowledges his sexuality and does something about it besides just moping and getting punched. I have heard jokes about how Kazuma is the only harem protagonist who isn't a beta cuck, but there is at least some merit to that statement. As far as male leads go, Kazuma is an absolute chad compared to many others. Again, this lends another facet of realism to this dumb, ecchi comedy. A young man gets trapped and forced into a party with 3 attractive young women. So realistically, some feelings and urges would definitely pop up and perhaps even lead to some active pursuit of romantic/sexual endeavors. And Kazuma delivers on that more than any protagonist I have seen from this genre. Additionally, without getting too spoilery for those who have not read the source material, let me just say that his advances actually amount to something. It sounds dumb, but for a comedy anime, this is huge. An MC that not only has a proactive role in his relationship with others, but also actually accomplishes something socially, instead of always failing for the sake of titillation, fan service, and ongoing waifu wars. In conclusion, Kazuma feels human and relatable because he's not a larger-than-life ideal hero, nor a dark and edgy power fantasy. He is just a dude trying to enjoy the life and people he is given. He complains when he dislikes something, he gloats when he achieves something, he can be petty, annoying, but ultimately he likes his friends and wants to do good. He is an asshole, yes, but he feels real. And by virtue of that, he breaks through the conventions of typical anime protagonists and becomes a memorable and insanely entertaining character. But what do you think? Agree? Disagree? Despise my very existence? Let me know. And as always, liking, sharing, and subscribing would be greatly appreciated. Take care, and until next time.